maybe I'm just in a good mood, but I'm handing out all sorts of carrots tonight. Let's talk about Pete Hegseth, the Pentagon, the military, because this is something that we've discussed for a very long time. You know, this is something I'm odd about, the destruction of our military. And just to recap things that I've said under Joe Biden and Obama and things like that, when the military is rotting, you can't see it unless you're in it. And oftentimes you can't even see it while you're in it, but unless you're in it, you can't see it. And you can't understand completely why it matters to you. Well, it's not that you can't understand. It's hard to make that connection, right? When I come on here and I talk about standards dropping in the military getting full of a bunch of fat communists who are destroying our fighting readiness. You care. I care, but what's the matter to us? You know, went to work and school and you have a life and things like that. Okay, it's not ideal. It's not what you want, but what does it matter? Here's why it matters so much and why I talk about it so much. I love history, battles and war and all kinds of things like every other dude. I love that stuff. But when I read the stories of crumbling empires whose indestructible armies were defeated and what happens to the people after those armies are defeated, it wakes me up. It shakes me awake. We've talked before about the fall of Carthage in the Third Punic War. The general, as Carthage was burning. Carthage was this juggernaut empire, but Rome completely wipes them out, and as Carthage is burning, he begins to weep. Why was he weeping? Was he sad for all those Carthaginians? No. He wrote it down. He was weeping because he knew that would be Rome one day. That's what happens to empires. That's what I don't want. And that's what will happen to us one day if the military slowly but surely continues to rot out from under us. We don't think it will. We look at all the planes and the bombs and the bullets and we're America. Can't happen to us. Oh, yes, it can. Every single empire who's ever said that, it's happened to them eventually. So I want to give credit where it's due. Pete Hegseth's done a really excellent job. He's done an excellent job, but he has a mountain to climb. And look, they tried to take him out with all these ridiculous hits on him and things like that. He didn't do this, a signal chat and whatnot. He talked about it.
I know exactly why I'm here. To bring war fighting and the war fighting ethos back to the Pentagon, to rip out the insidious ideologies and not compromise and not back down. To bring in new press voices into the Pentagon, which we've done, to reestablish standards and accountability, to not tolerate leakers, to 100% operational control of our border, to get rid of trans lunacy in the military. We haven't backed down. See, here's the thing. A lot of people come to Washington and they just play the game. And it's you punch their ticket and get along to go along. And, you know, start doing Meet the Press and going to the Council on Foreign Relations and spending time with all the new cocktail sipping crowd. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because President Trump asked me to bring warfighting back to the Pentagon every single day. Right. That is our focus. And if people don't like it, they can come after me. No worries. I'm standing right here. The warfighters are behind us. Our enemies know they're on notice. Our allies know we're behind them. And that, in this dangerous world, for the American people is what it's all about.
He's done well so far. He's slowly cleaning out the gunk. Now, there's a ton of gunk to clean out, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know if he can do it in 4 years. I don't know if it's possible for anyone to do it in 4 years. That's not on Pete. But he started, and he's doing all right. He is. He got Susan Rice out of the daggone board, which it's amazing she was ever on there to begin with. She's one of the most evil communists in this country. Here she was whining about it.
Well, if you're a white male Christian cisgender macho MAGA man, you can be as dumb as a rock and be deemed qualified to serve as Secretary of Defense. That's apparently what we've learned from this episode. But let's also be clear. There's a serious point here. DEI has been used as a slur. Anybody who, fits the mold of somebody who is not a white Christian cisgender male is by definition in this administration deemed inferior.
Why has the military rot been so bad? Because people like that demon have been running things for a long time. Think about that. That wasn't some sociology professor at Cal Berkeley. She's been in critical positions of power, national security positions of power for a long time, imposing her communism on everything she touches. So back to Pete Hegseth. For those who think there's more to do, and there is a lot more to do, you're right about that. But there is a lot of mess to clean up. And from what I see so far, not too bad, Pete. Not too bad. All right? Maybe I'm just in a good mood today. Let's talk about something terrible. You remember that terrible crash in D.C. Helicopter, Army helicopter, commercial airliner, had I believe it was a ballet team, a youth ballet team on it. Awful story from just a short while ago. And you remember how we handled it on the show, like we always do, not chasing stupid headlines and things like that. We prayed for the families, said the facts would come out, and kind of left the whole thing at that. Well, we have some facts out, and they aren't good, but I don't want to interpret them. I'm going to ask Jason to do that. Joining me now, Jason Nelson, retired Marine, United States Army Special Operations Command. You can follow him online at Real Jason Nelson. All right, Jason, I wasn't a pilot. They would never let me do something that involves that much intelligence. Tell me what happened here.
Well, first of all, we're both too tall to have ever been pilots, so I don't think that's going to happen. But that said, what's interesting that came out about this, Jesse, is that, and like you said, the key here is that obviously you don't want to jump to conclusions. You want to sit here. The most important thing is that there is a massive tragedy, 67 lives lost. That's the focus here. But at the same time, we need to learn from these mistakes. And as you've seen the data that's come out, there's been hundreds of near misses at that same airport. This is a constant problem. I don't know why they're using this. They've tried to shut down this airport numerous times. It's apparently Congress. It's just too convenient for them. But that said, you could see on approach when that helicopter was moving into the line to where the plane was approaching, they were warned off by the tower multiple times. She was above where she was supposed to be in altitude. She was traversing in an area she was not supposed to be traversing. But most importantly, I think, are those last 15 seconds where her right seat instructor told her to make a turn, instructed her, said, hey, look, we're being told by the tower that we can't accept this visual confirmation. We need to track left. And they did not do so. You can see that she did not acknowledge it for 15 seconds, continued on her heading and course. And that's when the intercept happened and when the tragedy occurred. And there's a lot of questions that come from that, including how somebody can be in a situation where they don't have an immediate response. I don't know about you, Jesse, but I don't. An immediate response to orders is what discipline is. And the inability to respond in that situation directly led to the loss of 67 lives.
Okay. Jason, this is prompting a lot of conversation, and a conversation I'm glad we're having about the current culture inside of the military. And there's a lot that goes into this, but the truth is there are a lot of preferred people inside of our military now through years of cultural rot. And yes, I'm talking about women, attractive women. I'm talking about whatever the latest minority of the day is that's attractive to the Democrat Party. They install officers that incentivize these things. And there is a culture where you're afraid you can't criticize people who deserve criticism. There's a lot of that, and it's a big problem.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that I remember very distinctly being at Parris Island. And I remember being with my platoon, 1053, shout out to Alpha Company. But I remember being with my platoon and we're about to go through the obstacle course. And I remember the confidence course. And if you remember those, you look over to the right and there was a shorter course, an obstacle course that had a confidence course that had obstacles that were closer together. I didn't have to jump as far. And I remember asking, why? What's that one for? It's for the women. Here's my question. Are we setting standards for our military members that are just standards across the board? Or are we setting standards that are people just, hey, you meet the minimum of what a person of your aptitude, a person of your height is expected to do? What matters is that when it comes to mission accomplishment, nobody cares. Nobody's going to lower the walls. No one's going to remove landmines. No one's going to turn around and change how they function in wartime. So when we sit here and lower standards, and you can see that Pete Hegseth just put out, the Secretary of Defense just put out that they're going to revamp the standards for medical waivers. And I know you're familiar with those as well, where you have people who are incapable of being deployed, incapable of doing their job, who are hanging on, for military for whatever reason to gain a retirement. I'm not really sure if there are recruitment issues, But in the end, you need to have the best warfighters downrange that you could possibly have. We know that Pete's bringing that attitude to the Department of Defense, and then we know we're going to see those standards start to get applied. However, you can see the results, in my opinion, and a lot of the accidents that happen in commands. You just saw that command where they would refuse to be backtracking on what the Secretary of Defense has to say as soon as they leave, sitting here and saying Greenland, and I'm embarrassed. It's an embarrassment that this is the culture that we've gone to in our military. And people have asked how we can change that. I've proffered it. I was just asked by Adam Gray, congressman out in California, asked, what can we do? I said, well, let's start sending reserve troops and stop sitting them in hotels every single time they go to drill for a weekend. Make them go back to drill centers and put up tents and bivouac and sit with their troops and put away their phones and stop acting like it's just a vacation and that everything is just to support some sort of special operator who's down in a cave somewhere, when in reality, everyone in the military should be ready and able to fight. And unfortunately, that isn't the standard anymore.
Can we fire our way out of this problem? And I say this because this is something I'm passionate about. You and I have had this talk many times before. I want this cleaned up. I want it fixed, but it seems like the depth of the problem is unbelievable. You could start with the academies, and I want to start with the academies, but it's so far beyond that. It's down to the lieutenant ranks. It's in the NCO ranks. It's a very, very deep-rooted problem at this point in time. Can we fire our way out of it?
My wife pointed something out to me the other day. She said, you always expect everybody to be perfect. And I said, that's absolutely not true. However, it was instilled in me from day one at Parris Island that you should strive for perfection at all times. That if you fail to reach perfection, you can continue to improve, but in the end, you will do pretty great. You'll never be perfect. It's impossible to be perfect, but it's something you should strive for. That's an attitude that people should have. We need a warrior culture. Can you fire your way out of this? I think you could try. I think you could turn around and set standards and immediately start holding people accountable. I'd love to go in and take a look at the books. Let's look at how many commanders are fudging the numbers. Let's take a look at PT standards across the board. I'd say outside of the Marine Corps, you're probably going to see there's a lot of fudging. There's a lot of commanders who are able to move metrics around in order to be green as a unit, but they're putting aside the actual readiness of their troops. But I think what you need is a cultural change, and it isn't just about getting someone in the top. It's across the board, and we have to get back to our core mission. There's been a lot of mission creep over the last 25 years. You and I are both aware of this. As we move to nation building, as we move to humanitarian sector, the military is being used not for its primary purpose. The primary purpose of our military is to destroy and break things. It's to kill people. It's to kill people so that American citizens who are not in the military do not die. That is the only intent of the military. It's to kill people efficiently and as many people as possible as you intend to kill, with as little collateral damage if you can. That's the intent. If that's the mission, then you have to ask yourself, whatever we're doing, is it making us a more lethal force? Or is it just checking a box or filling a DI, whatever? It doesn't really matter. In the end, are we changing standards just to try and broaden our force and make everybody have a kumbaya movement? Or are we trying to sit here and destroy our enemies? Because it's a very clear distinction between those two things.
Speaking of the military being used for every different role, they're down on the border now as well. Pete Hegseth was talking about the zone and the border. Here he was.
This is Department of Defense property. The National Defense Area, formerly known as the Fort Huachuca Annex Zone, is federal property. Any illegal attempting to enter that zone is entering a military base, a federal protected area. You can be detained, you will be detained. You will be interdicted by U.S. troops and Border Patrol working together. If you are an illegal crossing, you will be monitored, you will be detained by U.S. troops. You will be detained temporarily and handed over to Customs and Border Patrol. If you have cut through a fence or jumped over a fence, that's destruction of government property. If you have attempted to evade, that's evading law enforcement, just like you would any other military base. You add up the charges of what you can be charged with, misdemeanors and felonies, you could be looking up to 10 years in prison when prosecuted.
Jason, I don't have any problem with anything he just said. I don't have any problem with anything Hegseth is doing at this point in time. I'm not in love with the military at the border, though. You can argue that's, maybe its most justified function it's done in the last 20 years, but that's what we have Border Patrol for. And to be honest, I have a little bit of nerves about a bunch of young infantry Marines down on the border. Someone's going to die at some point in time.
Yeah, so what you're talking about right there is rules of engagement, ROE, right? So obviously, the military operates on a very different rules of engagement. Again, maximum force. I have no problem with, as you say, the United States Army Corps of Engineers going down and doing building on the border in conjunction with CPD. As a matter of fact, that's what they do in the Southwest region and in the Pacific region. They work hand in hand. And I understand why certain roles, it makes sense from a budgetary standpoint, it makes sense from a training standpoint to use those elements. But I agree with you. I understand why they're doing this. They're plugging holes. They're trying to show that they're willing to use maximum force to protect our border. They're doing it because this is a response to judicial just idiocy right now, where everyone is striking down and fighting within what's the basic job of the president, and they're stopping him from doing that. So what they're now doing is, like we did the first term, where they turned around and used USA's border military funds to put forth the border because everything else was held up in court. When it comes to discretionary funding, in this instance, I think it's very similar. You're being held up by bureaucrats, probably within CPB. You're probably being held up by funding purse strings by Congress. So this allows them to do that, to go out there and put that force and that element on the border. That said, I agree with you. I think understanding rules of engagement, understanding how escalation of force works, you're asking a lot of 18-and-a-half-year-old who's had 6 months of training to go down there and interdict on behalf of people who have had instead, years of training when you're talking about Customs and Border Patrol. And I would rather see that mission stay within that. I don't mind the support element aspect of it. I understand why they're going to do it. But if you're going to do it in this, you have to also say, look, this is likely going to end in an escalation of force that has a lethal outcome. There is no other way, as you just pointed out, that it's not going to end in that.
Jason, I appreciate you, brother. Come back soon. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.